Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So tonight's video is going to be, I'd say, a long time coming, and it's going to be kind of fun. I talk about a lot of, heavy topics here. And this is going to follow really the same subject matter that I usually cover. As I said, the topic of this blog or this YouTube channel is just analyzing Brazil from the perspective of race. So actually, the origins of this video, I could say, were about maybe 9 or 10 years ago. I lived in Sao Paulo for 9 years, and I came back to the U.S. in the fall of 2021. So I've been back for it's going to be almost exactly 2 years next week. And I just have a lot of good memories of spending my time in Sao Paulo for almost a decade. Um, I kind of got disconnected from what was going on in the United States for a while. Even though Brazil is is a country such that the United States influence is so big. I could I still do this to this day. There's some times when I can be reading, I could be totally unaware of a story that's going on in the United States, and I'm living here, and I'll get the news first from a Brazilian website. You know, I learned that it was through a Brazilian website that I had learned that Tina Turner had passed away. I don't know, was that a month or two ago? But I follow so much of the news that comes out of Brazil, and they report so much that comes out of the United States. It's kind of strange. I get the news from Brazil first about what's going on in the United States. Um, so while I was in Brazil all of that time, as I said, I kind of disconnected from American culture. I was just kind of blending in with what I was, taking in, living the life of an American in Brazil. Um, so some of my best memories was teaching English in Sao Paulo. I would do private classes. I taught at a couple of schools, and there's one particular school that I taught at was like it was a 30-minute drive by car, and it was like an hour travel by public transportation by the bus system. And it was probably something that I most remember, that I most enjoyed while I was there. In terms of just meeting new people. There were it was a low budget school in the periferia, they call it, the outskirts of Sao Paulo. And I had, young teenagers. I taught a couple of classes with just small kids, but most of my students would be teenagers to mostly young adults, but I had some people who were in their 40s and 50s that, I would have English classes with. And I think it was fascinating for not only the students, but also it was fascinating for myself, because being able to just interact with everyday Brazilians, it just gave me a real feel of, what people think, how people feel, you know, uh, huge city like Sao Paulo. Um, so I really appreciated some of the things that we would talk about, because, I would have 2 hour English classes with different classes. Some of the classes would have only two students, four, eight. I had classes as large as like 20 people in one class. I started off, teaching 4 days a week at this school. Then it eventually, as I started doing private classes, I just cut it back down to just 1 day a week. It was on a Saturday. And I would be there from like 9 in the morning to about, well, it's like 8 in the morning to about 5, would take an hour lunch. And I just got a chance just to hang out with just everyday Brazilians. I really appreciated that. I was trying to get beyond, you know, people looking at me as the American. I mean, obviously I would not avoid being American, as that's what I am. But I remember one particular time I was there for a class, and the professor had the director of the school had put this big like digital billboard in front of the school, like, hey, there's a native speaker of English here. Because people a lot of people, they prefer to learn from a native speaker of the language. And I understand that, as well as some Brazilians speak English, they'll still have a slight accent or even a heavier accent, right? So, people, they wanted to know me. Some of those people I really would have some really deep conversations with some of these people. In my classes, they weren't just English. As I'm exposing Brazilians to American history, culture, and these type of things that go with speaking English, I would talk about all types of topics, whether it be, alternative history. I would speak about music. I would speak about, films. I would speak about, the differences in race between how Brazilians see it, how Americans see it. It was every week. It was something that was just, it was going to be an intriguing topic. I remember it got to the point where our discussions in these classes would get so intricate, so involved that the students would be like, teacher, let's hurry up, and because I would try to get them through the English class in an hour and a half and then leave the last half hour to talk about whatever. And the students would just get to the point where we'd be like, teacher, let's hurry up and get through the English lesson so we can get to the good stuff, because I would talk about all just off the wall stuff, and it would have them thinking. They would come back to the next class and have other questions. And like I said, I really appreciated my time there. But where I'm going today, I'm speaking about, an internationally known artist, Bruno Mars. And as I say, really the origins of this video can go back to 9 years, because I think I discovered Bruno Mars for the first time in 2014. And it was intriguing because, I talked a lot about the type of music that I like. I'm somebody who can dig music from all over the world, whether it's from Peru or Egyptian music, Ethiopian music. I have a little bit of everything in my music collection, jazz, classical, obviously, R&B, funk, soul. I have Brazilian rhythms, samba, choro, MPB, Brazilian rock, Brazilian hip hop. I got a whole lot of stuff in my collection. All right. So this particular class, one of my students brought up, and the student asked me, she says, teacher, what do you think about Bruno Mars? And as I said, it was about 2014. I didn't know who Bruno Mars was. I had never heard of the guy. Like, I can't give an opinion on somebody that I've never heard of. And, I think I had seen his name online a few times, but I had never investigated who he was. If you hang out in Brazil long enough, now I'm quite sure this is probably true all over the country. Obviously, Brazilian radio stations play a lot of Brazilian music, but they play a pretty wide list of American music. I mean, you could turn on a station in Sao Paulo and hear, I don't know, I would estimate 15 to 20% of the music you hear on a radio station would be American. And I'm not saying that as a fact. I'm just saying every time I would get in a car, of course I would hear Brazilian music, but I would hear a lot of American music, because America, you don't really understand the influence of the United States till you go to live in another country. And then that's when it really strikes you. And I've said for a while, I'm not really feeling today's music. It's just, it has no soul. It has no rhythm. Everything is, computer based, computer oriented. Actually going back to the vintage era of hip hop between, say, 88 and 98, when they were just making some incredible samples of vintage music. I always say that for me, whether you're talking about primarily white music or primarily black music, I feel like the 70s was just the greatest era of music that we've ever seen. I don't think we'll ever see that again, because music is going in such a drastically different direction these days. It's like they've just taken the soul out of all the music, right? Generally, while I was living in Sao Paulo, I would learn about new songs, not from the radio, but from what people were blasting on their car stereos. And this is how I became aware of this singer, Ludmilla. And Ludmilla is a pretty big artist now. Matter of fact, this music festival that just happened in Sao Paulo, she was one of the Brazilian artists at this festival. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And within a few years, Ludmilla blew up. She jumped on the funk, the carioca funk. I think she's from Rio. And Ludmilla is one of the biggest singers in Brazil these days. She started off as MC Beyonce. She had to change her name for obvious reasons. But all I'm saying is I didn't listen to a whole lot of music on the radio. I would tend to download the songs I wanted and play that on my car stereo, whatever, because I had checked out of just, modern day music. Just sounds too plastic to me. So how sometimes when you hear music, you don't necessarily know who the artist is, but you know the song. So as it turns out, I did hear a few songs by Bruno Mars. I just didn't know that he was the singer. So around 2018, 2019, I started seeing some stories coming out about what people were saying in the United States about Bruno Mars. And it was intriguing because, again, I'm living in Brazil. and taking in these different perceptions of how race works versus how people see it in the United States. And so I'm looking when I see an artist like Bruno Mars, I mean, he fits squarely into, some of the topics that I'm going to talk about. So it had to have been 2018 to 2019 when these stories started to come out about Bruno Mars. I'm going to start with, let me see, was it this one or this one? So Bruno Mars defends himself against cultural appropriation accusations. Okay, so this is from 2021. I think the conversation first started in 2018 or 19, if I'm not mistaken. So this is an article from CNN, the website, and Bruno Mars appeared on the popular Breakfast Club. I mean, I'm not really a fan of the Breakfast Club at all, but I used to listen to it occasionally. And Bruno Mars, he spoke about this. He says, "Look, the only reason I'm here is because of James Brown, Prince, and Michael. Obviously, everybody knows Michael Jackson, Prince, and James Brown. And you see this, and when you listen to Bruno Mars, right?" When I first started getting into the music that the guy was making, I'm like, I found something that I was really into because he was a throwback to the type of music that I really grew up on in the 1980s. Like, wow, I like the way he modernized the sound, but a lot of Bruno Mars's music is a throwback to an era where I just really loved the music that was coming out at the time. What else did I want to check out here? Let me see here. So the discussion came up about Bruno Mars, and the question was, is he performing cultural appropriation by performing black music made popular by black artists, even though he's not black? Okay. That's, how do you feel about that? I'm quite sure you've heard the discussion. Somebody else came about and talked about the same issue, and this came about from a Vibe magazine in 2018. It says, no, Bruno Mars is not appropriating black culture. So what were some of the accusations? So let me see. Cultural critic Saren Sensei points out the 32-year-old Grammy Award winner is an appropriator who is not black and has not contributed to the music industry in the way that music legends Michael Jackson and Prince have. She says Bruno Mars 100% is a cultural appropriator. He is racially ambiguous. He is not black at all, and he plays up his racial ambiguity to cross genres, argues the writer after Mars is compared to Michael Jackson earlier in the discussion. Okay, so this is what was being said. Let me see. No. He's a karaoke singer. He's a wedding singer. He's the person you hire to do a Michael Jackson or Prince cover. Yet Bruno Mars has an Album of the Year Grammy, and Prince never won an Album of the Year Grammy. Bruno Mars got the Grammy because white people love him. He's not black, period. Okay. Yeah, I remember the 1985 Grammys because Prince didn't win. He had the biggest album of the year, but he did take home an Oscar for Purple Rain, of course. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let me continue this discussion. Now, just as a side note about what Levi Kaki said in Brazil, Bruno Mars, a lot of people consider him to be black. And this is what this article right here from the Terra website says. Seen as black in Brazil, Bruno Mars has already faced accusations of cultural appropriation. Whereas here's another headline says, after all, is Bruno Mars black or not? So this woman has a 15-minute video where she's talking about it. We have this particular article right here. Bruno Mars returns. Bruno Mars comes back to having his ethnicity debated after his show in the town. So this is a open debate that's going on in Brazil right now. I don't think there's anything to debate about it. I mean, like I said, part Filipino, part Puerto Rican, okay, he's not black, but I bet you he's of African ancestry. I've never been one to say, oh, you have to be this, you have to be that, because you can't really, force somebody to take on an identity that they don't have, And this is how I see Bruno Mars. I don't see him as a cultural appropriator. I see him as he's creating the music that he loves while he's giving us, snippets of the artists that he grew up appreciating. And we see that music is always like that. Every new generation is going to come out and they're going to take a little bit from the past. A couple of weeks ago, no, maybe 2 months ago, I have little kids, and I wanted them to be familiar with some of the great artists, some of the artists that they should know from the past. And, I show them a little bit every week. And one particular week, I showed them Michael Jackson's Beat It video. And I said, in the 80s, Michael Jackson he was huge. He was one of the biggest stars of the 80s. And one could say in pop music and just in pop music history. So they watched the Beat It video. And then one day last week, I showed them a black and white music video of Little Richard. And my daughter looked at me and said, "Hey, he looks like the guy from the Beat It video." It was kind of funny to me because Michael Jackson, maybe you don't see it as much. I do see it, some of that Little Richard influence when he really started wearing that heavy makeup. But I saw a little bit more of that in Prince, some years ago. The guitar player of Prince's side band, The Time, Jesse Johnson, had said how he and Prince both admitted that they wanted to look like Little Richard. So Little Richard's influence on rock and roll is enormous. I didn't come to understand that until I started reading more about his history and what he went through with everybody nibbling off of his style and not giving him credit for it. People talk about Elvis Presley and they call that cultural appropriation. It could be, I just when you're using something that's not yours, you should give credit for it, and I give credit. I do a lot of articles and I like to present the material that I have from a Brazilian source and just bring it to a wider audience. I like to do that myself. So the accusation of cultural appropriation, I want to know how people watching this video, how do you feel about that in terms of Bruno Mars? There's a few intriguing things that the girls pointed out in this article, saying how Bruno Mars is playing up his racial ambiguity to exploit this market, basically. And anybody who knows about Prince's career knows that, like, probably into the 90s, Prince kind of downplayed being black. He would describe himself as just a mix of, his mother was a mix of a bunch of stuff. And I remember when Purple Rain came out, and this journalist, Steve Ivory, he made it clear, like, look, Prince's father is black, Prince's mother is black, and in the film Purple Rain, he chooses to, have a woman who's either Italian or not black portray his mother to give people the idea that he's a first generation, mix. From what I understand, on Prince's, both sides of his family are from Louisiana and they migrated to Minneapolis. The rest is history. So Prince went through a period where he was playing the racially ambiguous way also, maybe to reach a wider audience if he could present himself as mixed race. But the funny thing is that when I look at Bruno Mars and people say, well, he's not black, he's Filipino and Puerto Rican. Okay. But if I'm not mistaken, and I know I'm not mistaken, Puerto Rico has a history with the black population also because of the transatlantic slave trade. You have a lot of Puerto Ricans who are of a visible African ancestry. They might even be light skinned, browner skin, or whatever. But just saying that Bruno Mars is Puerto Rican does not say, okay, we could say he's not black, but I would not say that Bruno Mars is not of African ancestry. I wouldn't be surprised if Bruno Mars has some African ancestry. If he's Puerto Rican, if his father was Puerto Rican, it's very possible that he could have African ancestry, even if it's just a little. When I look at the guy, take a look at a couple of these pictures. When I look at Bruno Mars and I say, okay, depending on how you see him, there's times when he does not look black, but there's other times when, you could say, okay, he looks like he's black mixed with something. He's got the curly, fluffy hair going on, the light skin look. It's like, if he had a black parent, would you be surprised? I'll just say that. So what I'm finding intriguing about this whole thing is that Black America, just the differences between how Brazilians and Americans see this race thing. For years, African American says, look, if you got one drop of black blood, you're just black. Now they're moving to a point that says, well, if you don't have two black parents, then you're not black. Okay. The people talking about Bruno Mars say he is absolutely not black. Okay. Flip that. And now you go to Brazil, in a country where for many years, people who were visibly black denied it, and they didn't want none to know. I'm a moreno, I'm a mulatto, I'm a mestizo, I'm just Brazilian, whatever it might be. They would avoid being black. But with the rise of black identity politics in Brazil, now people who you would not even expect to identify as black, particularly 15, 20 years ago, identify as black. So then what happens when you throw somebody who looks like Bruno Mars in the mix? Because you've got people in Brazil who could probably be, you could probably find some Bruno Mars lookalikes in Brazil. And so here you have it in the United States, where formerly we had the one drop rule that says everybody who has a drop of black blood is just black. Now the United States is saying, no, he's not black. And of course, you want to call him Puerto Rican and Filipino. Okay, yeah, then you could say that he's not black. But as again, I would be willing to bet that Bruno Mars had some African ancestry due to his father's Puerto Rican heritage. Okay, you flip it on the other side, or 20 years ago, people didn't want to be black. Now they want to claim everybody as black. So then the question came up here: neither white nor black. Why do blacks in Brazil love Bruno Mars so much? And I'm going to get into that, but I want to continue to explore a few more things in terms of my discovery of Bruno Mars before I get into the whole race topic. Okay. Okay. So after hearing what people were saying about him, I started listening more to his music. And as I said, from the era that I come from, the black music that I listened to at the time, the Gap Band, Rick James, Zap, of course, the whole Prince, Minneapolis, the Time sound, obviously the Jacksons, the P Funk, all of this stuff that I would listen to in the 80s. And like I said, Bruno Mars struck me as a throwback to that era. Hear a bit a little. When I would hear some of his songs like Uptown Funk, for example, I heard a little bit of Zap in there. I heard a little bit of Gap Band, and I'm like, this is the type of music that I can get with. He's a throwback to the 80s to me. That studio type of funk sound, right? A little bit of it. You hear a little bit of the Minneapolis sound in these songs. So I'm like, okay, this is Bruno Mars. I can get with some of his stuff, right? Then I heard 24 Karat Magic. And I'm like, yeah, he's got modern elements in his sound, but it still seems to be rooted in an era from the 1980s. Then in 2017, a little less than a year after Prince passed away, Bruno Mars is chosen to pay a tribute to Prince at the 2017 Grammys. Morris Day, I wouldn't say Morris Day in the Time, because most of the guys he tours with these days are not original members of the Time. So I just say Morris Day and a bunch of guys dressed up as the Time. He, the drummer Jelly Bean Johnson is still touring with him, but most of the guys with the Time these days, or what he calls the Time, are not original members. So they're not the Time to me. They're Morris Day and a bunch of guys dressed up as the Time. So Bruno Mars came out and did Let's Go Crazy, and it was like, I was impressed. He was playing a guitar. He had the whole thing down. I liked his tribute to Prince. I kept getting more and more familiar with Bruno Mars's music, and then he comes out with this album. I think the other singer's name Anderson .Paak, and what was the name of their album? They called themselves Silk Sonic. And I remember I was watching it on Instagram one day, and it was this older black man, and he was roller skating to this song that I had never heard. It was called Leave the Door Open, and I found, oh, that's the new song with the duo featuring Bruno Mars. I heard that song, and then later I would hear some other songs off of their album. Then I would hear Love's Train, the classic song by Confunction from the 80s. I don't particularly care for that song, their version. I love, Love's Train by Confunction, but I don't like the way Silk Sonic did it. Anderson .Paak did a good job with his part on the song, but Bruno Mars does not have the voice to cover Michael Cooper's vocals on that song. I prefer, the original by Confunction, but still the whole album just gives me hope for what's going on in music today, because honestly, most of the stuff I hear on the radio is just not something I would listen to. So anyway, with that said, I want to get more into Bruno Mars's look and how he's perceived in Brazil, because I thought this was intriguing. This guy did a video about it. So let me just talk about this. Neither white nor black. Why do blacks in Brazil love Bruno Mars so much? This article is taken from the Mundo Negro website written by Michael Fonseca. So last Sunday, September 3rd, Bruno Mars closed the first weekend of The Town. Again, The Town is a big music festival going on in Sao Paulo. I believe it's by the same makers of the Rock in Rio Festival. There were a number of artists, international artists. You had some Brazilian artists on this program as well, but a lot of international artists. Bruno Mars and Neo are the two that caught my eye when I found out about this festival. But it features a lot of different people. Ludmilla, Bruno Mars, Neo. These are some of the attractions for the town music festival. It includes other Brazilian artists. Okay, Ludmilla, Isa, and Lineker. These are all people that most Brazilians are familiar with these artists. So the presentation featured several hits, dance, and a lot of charm, in addition to making the festival audience and those from home sing along with him. But in addition to a beautiful show, it also reignited another debate. Is Bruno Mars Black? Now, you may see this or you may not, but in this picture, he looks like he could be related to the Jacksons to me. A lighter skinned version, maybe one of the boys, from the other Jackson kids. Okay, when he takes off his glasses, you see more of the Filipino influence in his facial features. But in this picture, he looks like he could be one of the Jackson kids or one of the Jackson grandkids or something. That's just me. That's what I see. It's got the fluffy afro going on. During the presentation, a tweet brought the subject back to the Black community and raised some questions about it. How can he not be white and also not be Black? Was the question. What happens is that Bruno Mars is read as a brown Asian. He was born in Hawaii, is of Filipino descent on his mother's side and Puerto Rican on his father's side, a mix of Asian and Latino. But as in Brazil, colorism is a subject that always raises some questions around the world, and it would be no different in the life of the owner of hits like Talking to the Moon and When I Was Your Man. Levi Kaki analyzed that even though he was not Black, in Brazil, he would end up being considered so due to the pigmentocracy. The most important thing about the fact that Bruno Mars is not Black is that he knows it himself and never said he was Black. We Brazilians who consider him Black because our racial reading is based on a pigmentocracy. This is what Levi Kaki commented on on his Instagram page. Even though he does not consider himself Black, Mars has sometimes been accused of appropriating Black culture, since his music and performances are always all focused or almost all focused on Black culture. So this is a video still from the Breakfast Club interview. Okay. In 2021, in an interview with the Breakfast Club, he defended himself on charges of cultural appropriation and spoke about his references. He says, "You can't find an interview where I haven't talked about the artists who came before me. The only reason I'm here is because of James Brown, Prince, Michael," the singer countered. "There is no denying that Bruno's music brings to mind Black music, the references of Black music, be it R&B, funk, soul, they're present throughout his discography and also in his performances, as it was possible to see in his show at the Town. This song comes from love, and if you can't hear it, I don't know what to tell you," Mars commented. Another thing that I like about Bruno Mars is that when this Silk Sonic album came out, all the presentations, whether in the music video or in his performances with Anderson .Paak, they did kind of like a recreation of Soul Train. The clothing they were wearing, it was like a straight throwback to the 1970s. And that's something that, again, it takes me back to an era of some of the best music that I can remember. So, shout out to, Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak. I mean, they made an incredible album. Another point that should be taken into account is that both his musical partnerships and his band are composed of Black people, which ends up giving more credibility to his songs. Okay. So this is Levi Kaki, and he's the one who's talking about, how Brazilians see Bruno Mars. It's like, okay, he's not Black, but in Brazil, he could be seen as Black, which is really intriguing because, as I said, if this was the 1980s in Brazil, nobody would consider Bruno Mars Black because everybody was so busy trying to avoid being considered Black. So now it's almost like Black is in vogue. So Black Brazilians are like claiming him like he's pessoa negra, Black person. Okay. Intriguing. So this is what Levi Kaki wrote in his post, and I'm going to overdub what he's saying. Do you all know that Bruno Mars isn't considered Black? Yeah,
Pois é,
guys, the
Fábio. A
international star
população
that
aqui
put
tem
on
uma
an incredible show
tolerância
yesterday in
muito
Sao Paulo
grande
for the
à álcool e
town
tal.
confuses the
Você vai
minds of
repetir
many
muita
people out
gente por
there.
aí. Apesar do Bruno
Although
Mars ser
Bruno Mars
black,
has
essa
darker
mistura,
skin,
as
ancestry has
tendências
nothing
dele
to
não
do
tem
with it, and it
nada
is
a
worth
ver com
remember that
raça.
having dark
Vale
skin does
lembrar
not
que
necessarily
essa
make a
mistura
person black.
não
This
necessariamente
is
se
because in the
torna pessoas
southeast
negras.
of
Então,
the
por
Asian
que, gente, no
continent, there is a
Sudeste
large
do
number of
continente
people who have more
asiático
almond,
existe um
darker,
grande
browner
número de
skin,
pessoas que têm
and
a
this is
pele
exactly
mais
the case with Bruno
amarelada,
Mars.
mais
He
morena,
has
mais
Asian and
escura.
Puerto
E
Rican
esse é
ancestry
exatamente o
and
caso do
tan
Bruno Mars.
skin,
Ele tem
or as you
ascendência
call it here,
filipina
morena.
do Sudeste da
And I've
Ásia
discussed this term
e
morena in a
porto-riquenho.
number
Não
of
dá para ver
previous
um
videos. You know, morena is that catch bag. Anybody in Brazil can be considered a morena. If they're not Asian, if they don't have blonde hair or red hair, if they're dark, if they're a light skinned black person, if they're just a person who's racially, ambiguous, a white person with dark hair, all of these people can be considered morenas, right? I've seen dark people, people with my own skin color who define themselves as morenos in Brazil. It's just, for a lot of people, it's a way of avoiding being black. But this is these days, it's less common than it was, say, 20 years ago. More people are more likely to identify themselves as black. So then, with this black consciousness, this ascension of black consciousness, somebody sees somebody like Bruno Mars in Brazil now, and he's people see him as black because they are accustomed to seeing that look. Anyway, Kaki continues. He says, I can't go
demais
too
aqui
long
nesse
in this
vídeo, mas
video,
para
but to
resumir,
summarize,
Bruno
Bruno
Mars
Mars is
não é
not Afro-descendente.
afrodescendente.
He's
Embora
not
por
a
morar
descendant
no
of Africans.
Brasil, ele teria
Although if he lived in
socialmente
Brazil, he would be
visto
socially
enquanto uma
read
pessoa
as a
negra.
black
Isso
person.
mostra, gente, como a questão da
This shows
construção
people, this
racial
shows
tem a
people
ver com
how the
construção de
issue of racial
sociedade que é
construction has to do with the
variável e
construction of a
complexa
society that
como
is
essa.
variable
Como
and
muitos de
complex
vocês
as
já
hell.
devem saber, a forma de
You
definir
should
uma
already
pessoa
know how to
negra no
define a black
Brasil
person
é
in Brazil
diferente
is
de
different from
diversos
several other
outros
places
lugares
in the
do
world,
mundo,
such as in the
como nos
United
Estados
States.
Unidos.
I'm
E
going to make a
fazemos
video
sobre
about
isso
this
em
soon,
breve,
so
então me
follow me to
sigam lá
remember
para
that the
acompanhar
purpose of this
isso, tá?
video is
Lembrando que o
just to bring
objetivo desse
information.
vídeo é
I'm not
apenas
making
trazer
any judgment, and in
informação, não
my
estou
heart,
fazendo
he is
nenhum
black.
julgamento de valor do
But
Bruninho,
most
e no
importantly,
meu
the black
coraçãozinho
community
ele é
loves
negrão.
Bruno Mars' songs and
Eu
feels
quero você.
represented. Even if he is not African American, he continues to be considered a great artist with references to black music and even being called Nego Doce by some. So, I wanted to find a way. It's been a while because I've been wanting to talk about Bruno Mars for some time. And this just, it just gave me the opportunity because it's like, wow, I wanted to mix this story, with a perspective from the perspective of race, considering how people see him in the United States in the black community versus how people in Brazil see him when he comes to Brazil. And it's just funny to see this back and forth between Brazil and the United States in terms of how race works out. So here again, you got this confusion going on. So I'm just curious. Okay, I'm saying, we don't, obviously Bruno Mars does not define himself as black, which is, it's totally fine. So anyway, curious to know what you guys thought about this particular video. I hope it sparked a conversation about Bruno Mars. The ongoing, we can say, it seems like the United States and Brazil are going in opposite directions in terms of what defines someone as black. Black Americans seem to be moving towards the direction of, look, if you don't have two black parents, you're not black. Whereas Brazil, black people are claiming a lot of people who previously would not have defined themselves as black. Then you got people within the black movement in Brazil that says, no, that person's too light to be considered black. So it's quite an intriguing time when we're talking about racial classification and identity and looking at it from two perspectives, both the American and the Brazilian. So anyway, I'm going to end this video here. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on, this topic. Some of you may be looking at it like, well, he's just an artist. Why you got to even debate what he is? Because it's an intriguing discussion. My video channel is all about discussing race discussing race in Brazil and in the wider diaspora, actually. So just want to spark the conversation, see what you guys think. Do consider dropping a comment, share your thoughts in the comment section. Like this video, share this video, consider subscribing to the channel. If you've seen more than a few videos you found intriguing, click on the notification bell so that you know when I put up my new videos. And with that said, I'm going to end the video here and ask you all to come and check out the next video.